would you rather be doing right now? Your taxes? Or watching cat videos? Or how about this?
Booster ignition, liftoff of Space Shuttle Discovery.
Maybe all three, but we won't judge. But if the sight of a rocket launch catches your attention, we understand. That is really cool. And how about this? That is called plane spotting. And there are a lot of people who have made quite a hobby of it. We'll show you what we found. In this episode of Aviation Intrigue, we'll show you how easy it is, also reveal some surprising facts, and show you how this can lead you into even more experiences in aviation. Welcome aboard.
This is Aviation Intrigue.
I don't know if I told you this several years ago, well, almost 30 years ago, but I don't want to mention that and show off my age. But I had this job in Toronto, Canada, and my office was just outside the Toronto Pearson Airport. And out of my window, and at that time I was an entry-level person, so it was a cubicle, but I had a window, and it was overlooking this runway coming into Toronto. And when the winds are right, every afternoon, I want to say from 3 p.m. till about 5 p.m., something like that, and the European jets, the British Airways, the KLMs, the Air France, the Alitalia, Lufthansa, all those things will land. I'm telling you, those 2 hours I couldn't get anything done because I was just riveted watching these jets come in. And it just was so fascinating. Did you ever feel like that?
I think I've ever had a window view like that to these giant airliners. That is such a cool story. I wish I had been able to get a job where I had an office view like that. That is really cool.
Yeah, it's in a place called Mississauga. It's on Airport Road, and which is right outside. I didn't understand because I was not in aviation at that time, so I didn't understand. They would land on certain day. Now I know that it's because of the winds are favoring that runway, and it was just fascinating. The landings maybe more than the takeoffs, but it was just, especially the 747s, which are majestic, beautiful looking birds.
It's really amazing. And I have always loved watching airplanes, but my experiences are probably more on the light airplane side. I don't remember ever seeing a 747 up close, much less having been aboard one. So that's a great way to get people to start looking at airplanes. Why don't we talk about that some?
Yeah. So, you and I are aviators, so obviously we have this fascination towards airplanes. But it turns out that there are people who are not aviators, who are not pilots, but they spend a lot of time watching these airplanes. Are you familiar with this?
Yes, it's called plane spotting, and it's something I picked up on when I started looking at some websites that are related to that. Plane spotting is simply looking up and seeing airplanes, or specifically going to places where you can get the best views. These are often related to large airports with the airliners, much like what you saw from Toronto. And we're finding that there is a growing community of people in aviation, people not in aviation especially, who are just fascinated by these to kind of make a hobby of it. And it's been really fascinating to see these communities grow and get some new ideas and learn new things. And by the way, it has expanded to everything from little tiny airplanes and ultralights all the way to space vehicles.
What do you think is the fascination for a non-pilot person to watch these airplanes take off and land? There's got to be something about it.
There's definitely something about it, because whether you're in the world of aviation or not, or someone outside looking in, sharing a fascination with it, it's just something that seems to be common to people from all backgrounds, all different ages. And the only theory I have on that is that as humans, it's not natural for us to be able to fly. And it's something that we probably wonder about and have probably wondered about through millennia. How can we get up there and fly around like the birds? And so I think everyone just naturally thinks about those things. I think sometimes the end reactions could be, well, no, that's really not for me. I'd be afraid of falling or crashing. And others will say, well, yeah, there's that, but it's still something I'd like to try. And now that we have all manner of ways to get up in the air and experience flight, it has really become something that we can all share and talk about in so many layers, including just the basic act of plane spotting.
One more anecdote that maybe show how old I am, but when I was young, we were allowed to go inside the airports, not like today where we have to stand outside of the security gates. Previously, they would allow us to go all the way. In fact, you could go on the tarmac. I'm talking about the days where there was no jet bridge. So the planes will pull up and there'll be these stairs where you have to come in and out. And we were allowed on the tarmac. And so to some extent, aviation was more accessible, shall we say, back then than now. But air travel is much more prevalent. A lot of people get on planes. Previously, it was a luxury. Not everybody got on an airplane. So to some extent, it's gotten less accessible. In some extent, it's gotten more accessible.
Definitely, I can see it both ways. And as one who had not experienced airline travel until early adulthood, I can see how things have really changed as well. It sounds like before 9/11, for those who don't remember, you could have a lot more access to the big window views from the terminal and to get up a lot closer. But since more of us are also flying by airline these days, that probably maybe balances that out. And plane spotting in and of itself has just also grown because now we have smartphones and ways to share those with people. So in some ways, it has become less accessible. And I'm sure that airport security has maybe limited people's movements around airport peripheries where they were able to view airplanes. But at the same time, technology has allowed us to open it back up in certain ways. And that's something that is really a lot of fun to talk about and share. And hopefully we could talk about some ways for people to try it out if they haven't, or try out a new way of plane spotting.
That's what we are finding, right? There are so many different ways now you can do this so-called plane spotting. We're going to get into that here shortly. I also want to mention, I don't know how you were, but when I was young, you would sit on your porch and make paper airplanes or balsa wood airplanes, or maybe stick your hand out there, pretend to be airplane, make airplane noises. So again, I think there's something just fascinating about flying things, not just big airplanes, but little airplanes, that from being a child, we kind of get fascinated. I know for a fact that that doesn't go away. Still, no matter where I am, if there's a plane landing or taking off, I got to drop everything and look at it.
As a kid, I loved it when we took family field trips to air shows. I got to do that a few times as a kid. They just couldn't tear me away. I wanted to walk among all the displays. I wanted to see all the air shows again and again. And so as a kid, that was my form of plane spotting. I didn't have much exposure to air travel, as I mentioned. But this was something that I realized later on when I did start flying, that really fed my fascination, and that really fed my motivation to pursue a pilot certificate later on. And I will always go back to those memories of getting right up close to really cool air show airplanes and really cool historic airplanes, and getting to touch them and take pictures and walk around them. And that has never left me. I realized after I became a pilot that I've been a lifelong plane spotter, and I continue to be.
So we just had the space capsule come back to Earth after these astronauts were in the space, in the International Space Station for like 9 months. And it was on live webcast, and I was riveted to this. And there was like thousands, hundreds of thousands of people watching. And again, it doesn't have to be an airplane in person, or you don't have to be in an airplane. Just watching online gave me goosebumps. It was just a incredible feeling of watching something like this. And of course, the technology is just astonishing. I'm like, oh my goodness, reusable capsule. So there's so much fascination in terms of aviation world and also aerospace world.
Definitely. I think you can take the term plane spotting and go from the very basic, just simple looking up and seeing something, to space vehicles and space capsules and launches and returns and all those things that we've seen this week online. If you're lucky enough to be there in person, all the better too. That's all part of this world now. And it has, I think, really fed the fascination for everyone, because this is something we can all watch worldwide and share into. And it's amazing what the advances in aerospace and aviation have brought us to. It just keeps getting better and better. And I will still call that a form of plane spotting. I often call it wing watching because wings can take on all kinds of forms, from the fins on the rockets to the flying wings on helicopters and drones. But I would say that this all fits under that way of viewing anything that flies. And I'm glad you mentioned the NASA activities this week, because that has been on the news. And I think that people worldwide took in the views of that online. And it's been really, really fun to watch.
Yeah, it is indeed. I think that it's just not little planes. It's not just big planes. It's space shuttles. It's aerospace stuff. It's satellites. And we're going to get a lot deeper into this topic about what you can do watching these airplanes, plane spotting in person, what you can do when you're not in person, like watching this NASA thing online. There's also other electronic ways of tracking these airplanes we're going to get into. And we got some cool stories and cool statistics and cool data to share with everyone.
If you're a plane spotter, tell us the best websites to go to learn more. And tell us your favorite places where you've gone to watch airplanes.
We've just been talking about watching NASA, which everybody is riveted to. This so-called plane spotting, is that new, or has it been there for a long time?
If you think about it, it has been around since we invented flight, since we invented airplanes at least over 100 years ago. And I'm just thinking in the U.S., of course, versions of flight vehicles had been invented all over the world at that time. But when the Wright brothers invented their version of the airplane, it wasn't long before people started building airplanes and then demonstrating them. And if you look at museums, if you look at old photos, you'll find thousands and thousands of people coming to watch these demonstrations of this novelty, this thing called the flying machine, I think they were called back then. And every time there was a demonstration, it just drew crowds. So I would call that the original form of plane spotting.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen history books or Discovery Channel documentaries about people strapping wings or something, trying to flap, and then other people are watching. Sometimes it ends well, some other time it doesn't.
I think most of the time it did not end well with the flapping wings. I think they figured out pretty quick that was not going to work. Unfortunately, some of them did figure out the hard way, and there have been a lot of mishaps with the early airplanes. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It started with that.
Yeah, so it's been around for a long time, so it's not new. But so if somebody wants to do this, let's say they listen to us and they got fascinated, yeah, I'd like to try this. What do they do?
It could be just as simple as finding out where some of the closest airports are to you. And if you don't live in a big city, like in a LAX, a JFK, the big hub airports, Chicago, there are a lot of local airports around that you could find on the map. And a lot of them are not too far from public roads. And a lot of them even have viewing areas where you can park and sit and watch airplanes come and go.
I used to live in the Albany, New York area, and there was a place where a expressway, the Northway, was literally in the approach end of one of the runways, and people will be parked there. In fact, I think they built a parking lot where people can park there and watch these airplanes come fairly close. I mean, you're not going to touch it, but it feels like you're going to touch it. It's pretty incredible.
Yeah, and you can discover these by accident, because that's how I found out that you could do this with smaller airports, with airline traffic, some medium-sized cities where you're driving along a state highway and you realize, oh, I'm on the backside of an airport and there's something coming in right now, and you pull over and look and they fly right over your head, and it's really cool. So a lot of these can be just a matter of coming across them. And if you can safely pull over and look up, or even get out and take pictures, it just makes your day. It's just a really, really cool experience when you come across things like that.
You know, you mentioned small airports. Are there a lot of little airports? You mentioned that maybe you can just go to it. I don't think I was aware how many airports there were until I became a pilot, but I think there's way more airports than people think there are.
There are way more airports than people think there are.
Okay, let me guess.
US.
It's like all of US, 400 airports. Does that sound right?
That sounds right in terms of a common guess, but you've got to go up quite a bit in number there. That's an underestimate. More than that. Higher.
More than 1,000. Okay.
More than
What is the
that.
number?
If you look at statistics for U.S. public use airports, which means anybody can fly there if you have obviously everything else set up to fly to places, and you check on that category, public use airports in the U.S., there are over 5,000
Wow.
public airports in the U.S. That's potentially 5,000 places you can go plane spotting. Obviously, not all of them are going to be very well set up based on their location or where you can actually see that. And a lot of them do have secure fences and places where you're not supposed to go as an onlooker. That's all good. There's plenty more out there. And if you want to check out your local airport, which can be something like a local municipal airport owned by a city, or a county airport owned by a county and possibly shared with other counties or other municipalities, there are probably at least 100 or so in your state, depending on the size of the state. And if you go across the country, there are hundreds and hundreds and more than 5,000. So it never hurts to at least know where they are. A lot of people don't realize how close they are to a local airport. It can be within even a couple of miles. And it's really cool to actually check out any vantage point you have to be able to watch airplanes come and go. And
So
have...
how can somebody find out if there's an airport near them? Can they just look up in a map?
Sure, you could probably do a search for nearest airports and find things that you probably didn't expect to find. A lot of these are very, very small airports, possibly even one grass runway, but they may have 30 or 40 airplanes based there. And on a nice day, they will have airplanes coming and going. The best way to do this is to actually find these and check them out on, say, a really nice calm wind Saturday morning. Because I would say at our local airports, that's the busiest day of the week. And as long as the weather is good, you're bound to see something. You're bound to see airplanes coming and going.
So if there is airports within, I don't know, 15, 20, 30 minutes drive, and it's calm, maybe blue skies and nice, that would be the time when small planes are flying around, and it'd be good to go watch. The other thing, I know I do this thing, if somebody walks up to me and has a question about flying or airplanes, I don't have any problem in talking to them. I think most pilots and most airplane owners are like that.
That's how I discovered small airports. I just drove up to one and asked the guy some questions. And so that led from one thing to another. And so that's my story in terms of discovering that you have a lot of local small airports nearby. I wasn't shy. I was so fascinated by these that I just went up and started asking questions. And that's what started me on my journey and learning along the way just how many there are around. Whether you're in a metro area or a more rural area, they are all over the place. You can be literally within a few miles of a few airports, no matter where you are. And the bigger the airport, usually the bigger the aircraft. So depending on what it is you like to see, you could check those out. A lot of county airports I would call medium-sized, where they will have things like charter jet traffic, if that's your thing. That's the kind of aircraft you'd like to see. And if you check around, you're bound to find something.
You mentioned, I think, Chicago in passing before. So everybody knows of Chicago O'Hare and Chicago Midway, but there's a whole bunch of other airports probably people don't know unless you're a pilot.
Yes. There are airports located in the vicinity of Chicago O'Hare, and we call those basically Chicago area satellite airports because they're not big enough to serve airliners, and some of them are maybe just big enough to accommodate private jet traffic, charter travel, and some are only big enough to accommodate little airplanes, 2-seat and 4 airplanes that you and I fly on a regular basis. And there are, I can just think off the top of my head, there's several within 50 miles of Chicago.
I think there's probably at least 24 from DuPage to Milwaukee to Aurora to Lewis University to Lake on the Hills. There's so many of them. For anybody who's watching and listening to us, pick up the map, find out where your nearest airport is, and go spend some time watching it. Take your kids. It would be a fabulous picnic day. And some of these places you can actually literally park outside. And the smaller airports are probably more accessible than, you don't want to jump the fence in O'Hare and get arrested, obviously. But small airports, you may be able to get closer to the action.
Yeah, there's a lot of airports, especially outside of the bigger cities, where the roads go quite close to them. There are places to park quite close to the airport without having to go across the fence, which we don't recommend doing. Airport security is a thing these days as well. You can find a good safe spot to park and view, usually within a half mile of the airport. And that's one way to just simply try out plane spotting. You'll be closer to aircraft in that way than you could watching them on the ground from a mile or two away because of the fences and because of the security. But having them come overhead when they're on a 1 mile final to an airport, you could get it pretty close that way too. That's a pretty cool way to try them and just see if you can see them flying overhead. And if you're lucky enough to find an airport in your area that has viewing parks, that is the best way to take your family for free and maybe take a lunch along and sit on a picnic bench and watch airplanes come and go. I can think of a couple in my region where they have designated parks, little viewing areas pretty close to the runway, pretty close to the taxiway, and you definitely got a great view of the airport from there. And I would say if you can find that, you're in luck.
So it's great if you live near an airport, small airport, medium airport, big airport. But what if you're not? What if there's no convenient place for you? Is it mean you cannot be a plane spotter or you can't watch airplanes? What other ways can people get involved in?
There are so many websites out there now. If you just do a search on plane spotting, or depending on your preference, for example, you could type in, where can I go 747s? You'll get a lot of websites that will have viewing places, that will have places at big airports, small airports. And so it's pretty easy to do a search nowadays. One of my favorite websites that has been around for years is called planespotting.net. And this is where people all over the world upload photos they've taken of mostly airliners. So you get to see international heavy airliners, great shots of them coming and going, close-up shots. I think a lot of people have telephoto lenses for these, amazing pictures. But you can also find small aircraft and personal aircraft on that website as well. So I would call that one of the original favorites.
We will make sure to put that website link in our description so people can look at that. So are these hobbyists or professionals who are taking these photos?
From what I could tell, it seems like they're amateur plane spotters, because even though the photos are fantastic and maybe some of them are professional photographers, because you can do a lot with photos like that, they're just posted online for free. Anybody can patch into the website. There's no login or account required, and scroll through thousands and thousands of pictures, and you can do searches and filters, and you can see how many uploads there have been on a given day. And there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of uploads a day. It seems to be like a really, really popular website.
Yeah, and if you're airplane nerds like the two of us, then you can be spending hours trying to go through all these airplanes.
I don't want to admit how many hours I've spent. Just today, we're looking at planespotters.net. So it's really cool. And it's really addicting, and it's something I discovered some years ago. It has been around for a long time.
There are also these places, reasonably famous places, where they have this very interesting or very unique places where the airports are. I think St. Martin's, where I've seen so many videos of these big jets landing with people standing on the beach, and it feels like they can literally reach and touch the landing gear. And then I've seen these photos from this mountain airport, Lukla, I think, in Nepal, where it's a very short runway. And then the moment you cross, you're in sheer drop. And so there are also people there's like live cams, live webcams that you can actually watch some of these.
Yeah, live cams are at a lot of places, from national parks to airports. And if you want to do airport spotting, like the photo you mentioned, I know of that one, and I'm familiar with the images from St. Martin's, where people are on the beach watching airliners flying overhead. You could do searches on those as well. There are lists of like the most interesting airports in the world, and there's some amazing pictures out there on things like that. And these are places that are going to be really hard to get to in person. And so the photography is just a really, really great way to take those in.
Yeah, I think that is the nice thing about technology with the internet and and like YouTube and things like that, where you can have access to this virtually that you probably may not be able to do in person. We talked about the NASA. There's a live stream going on anytime there's a launch. And so you can track these things and you can have it in the background running, and it's fascinating. Of course, some of it is geeky, but I think they do a good job explaining things in layman's terms so that they try to make sure that people understand what is going on. So I think there's plenty of resources out there.
Definitely, you can pretty much look for any kind of aircraft, spacecraft you want to see online, photos, videos. I know that personal plane spotting has also grown because now our phones are so capable in terms of taking great video and photo that social media feeds have also become a great source of this. And you cannot help but look at these cool videos when someone happens to catch something flying right over the heads, because you get sound and you can get the rumble of the jets as they're taking off, and you can get a sense of the scale of some of these aircraft. And these are things that people have just spotted in person with their phones. And that's another way of sharing these really, really cool experiences.
Yeah, I think in the previous episode you mentioned the incident with the Southwest Airlines with a close call, and they had to do a go around, and that was caught on a lot of cell phones.
I think that was caught on a lot of cell phones, and I think it was caught on a security camera and so on and so forth. And that happens once in a while. It seems like when we're seeing the news reports that we talked about last time, a lot of these were caught on people's smartphones because they just happened to be out there plane spotting. They just pulled out their phones to take a picture of, say, an airliner flying overhead. And that just happened to be the time a close call occurred. And I know that there have been aircraft accidents that were caught on phone just because somebody was looking overhead. And of course, as we talked about, that's extremely rare to have something happen, but that is something that we've seen just as one result of plane spotting.
Yeah, maybe they were at the right place at the right time or wrong place at the right time.
One of the best ways to combine in-person and online plane spotting is to look up these online communities and online blogs where the websites have listed very specifically where you can get the best vantage points to see airliners. I've got one up here right now. This website is called nycaviation.com. There's a whole bunch out there, but this one listed a lot of the large international airports in the U.S. and I think a couple overseas as well. And one example here, I'll just read real quick. Boston Logan International Airport Plane Spotting Guide. Spot A, Constitution Beach. The views you get, very specific directions on how to drive there, how to take the train there from Boston, and photography, some photo tips. Spot B, Spot C, Fort Independence. These are really cool ways to look at what other people have discovered, and then you can go there yourself. I find this to be really, really fun, and I'm addicted to this website now, along with planespotters.net. So just come find me next week and pull me out of the hangar.
I see that you're sitting in a hangar with the airplane behind you. You mentioned all these websites. It is amazing what a good service these guys are doing. Not only they're spotting, but they're creating a community for people who already have interest in it or maybe want to become interested in it. I think that if anybody has young kids or whatever, this is a good place and a good hobby to get in. It's not very expensive. You don't have to spend any money or much money to do this.
Sure. We talked about local travel. And for those who are a little more adventurous, you can certainly travel across the country to Boston Logan and check out these viewing places as part of a vacation, or if you happen to have a reason to visit the area. But in terms of the local airports, large or small, this is the absolute perfect family-friendly activity. And it gets even better when, say, the local airport is having an event. They will have fly-ins, especially during the summer, where anyone is invited to go have a pancake breakfast, go have a hamburger lunch, and sometimes get an airplane ride. So sometimes you can take plane spotting a little bit further just by way of knowing when some of these events happen. And that's where the airports are open to the public, and you can go check these things out really, really close up.
That's great. Not only can you watch these planes online in websites, but you can also track them electronically. These days, there's there are ways to look at them to see where they position. I think we have, and maybe a lot of people are aware of, well, no pun intended, flightaware.com, where you can track commercial jetliners. You can even track private planes in there. There's a adsbexchange.com. We'll put all these links in the description. So you can also use this to watch, quote unquote, electronically what airplanes are doing up in the sky anywhere in the world.
Yes, you mentioned FlightAware and ADSB Exchange. These are built on a U.S. and I believe a global network of the types of transponders that aircraft are flying around with these days. And these are anywhere from the large airliners all the way down to small private aircraft, where the beacon signals they emit are allowing other aircraft to see them electronically. And this technology, which has advanced greatly in recent years and is now available online in terms of the data they put out, allow you to see tens of thousands of aircraft that are in the air live via the electronic icons of airplanes flying around in the sky. And you can hover over these aircraft or click on one and actually get a little bit of information about it, type of aircraft, sometimes who owns the aircraft, the company that might own the aircraft, as well as its speed and altitude. And so this is virtual plane spotting for sure.
If you go into flightaware.com, for example, and just look at the U.S. airspace, I would guarantee anybody who's looking at it is going to be like, wow, we had no idea there are so many airplanes. It's like thousands. It looks like a beehive. So if you're talking about pilots' stress levels or air traffic controllers' stress levels or a crowded airspace, you'll get a very good idea by looking at these things as to how many airplanes are there at the same time in the air.
Yeah, it's amazing. And we didn't have these tools some years ago, but if you just look at the statistics on how air travel has grown in the past 20, 30 years, even though we only now have a representation we can all see on the thousands of aircraft in the air, we know that that has only gotten busier over time. And so to take a snapshot from today, you can say, wow, the airspace is always crowded all the time. And near the big cities, it's even more crowded.
If we can track these things, obviously, we may be able to pick up when celebrities are traveling. So I know that the world is fascinated with where Taylor Swift is traveling. So you can track her airplane, where it's taking off, where it's landing, etc. That seems like that kind of puts things in a little murky waters in terms of ethics and privacy. So it brings up a little bit of a can of worms.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. That has brought on some controversies online. Celebrities like the one you mentioned have jets flying all around the world. And the fact that this technology allows the public to track any jet, and it doesn't matter whose it is, has obviously started, again, a new form of plane spotting, virtual plane spotting, where people are going to follow them around and see where they're traveling. And that has caused some controversy in terms of privacy, security. And I'm sure that someone out there somewhere is working on tools to enhance the privacy and security of aircraft like that. It has been traditional for company-owned aircraft. You could think of some large companies that own aircraft, and they have had tools in the past to electronically shield themselves from being revealed to the public as far as where they're traveling.
I'm sure this is a ethical conundrum that we have to deal with, but you should be able to block out if you don't want people to see. But then again, there's very little privacy these days. There's cameras and electronic devices following you all the time. So I guess it's c'est la vie. It's what it is.
If you want to learn more about plane spotting, tell us in the comments. We talked about all the different ways you can achieve plane spotting, whether in person or online. You can watch aircraft of small sizes, large sizes, space launches. All that is so cool that you can do it in any way you would like to do it. And I'm wondering how many people who end up flying in space started out as plane spotters. Do you think that this is an activity that can get young people into aviation and aerospace careers?
I'll just start with my own personal experience. Remember the story I shared about having an office in Toronto across from the airport? A year from year after that, I actually started taking flying lessons. I
Wow.
moved back to the US and I started taking flying lessons after that. Now, I I didn't think about it that way, but now looking back, just that fascination about watching these airplanes come in and land on a daily basis, there's something about that excited me. I wasn't thinking about it that way, but for sure, and I guarantee I'm not the only one to have gone through this.
Yeah, I talked about driving into a little country airport and then deciding probably like 5 minutes later that I wanted to become a pilot. So it has been an endless source of inspiration even today because I love hearing about how pilots discovered flying. And so many of them point to watching airplanes as kids. And so it's really, really fun to share those stories.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting if we looked at the history of different famous aviators to see how many of them started kind of watching airplanes, maybe because they didn't have the means to be flying. I bet the world is peppered with a lot of personal stories. I'm sure some people like watch planes and they don't become pilots. So it's not like everybody who's watching and fascinated by airplanes is going to become a pilot. But if they want to, there's plenty of ways.
And that's okay with me. Everybody is going to get their exposure to aviation in a different way, and they're going to enjoy it in different ways. So obviously, you do not have to be a pilot or be in aviation to enjoy plane spotting or enjoy watching space launches. So for me, the real key is letting people know about all the ways they can enjoy watching because you never know where that's going to lead. And I also think that any way we can get people to really understand how prevalent aviation is in their own backyards, that local airports are actually closer than they think. I think that is of great value to people who are in aviation because we are always wanting to tell people what a big world it is out there and that there's people from all walks of life involved in that. And to have that common experience of enjoying plane spotting is a great way to start. And I know that a number of astronauts have started out that way. A lot of them started out flying from grass strips in little airplanes all throughout the history of spaceflight. And they would go on to, say, a military academy to become a pilot for the service and then go on from there. And that is a common story I hear in terms of how astronauts got their start. And it is amazing the breadth of aviation experiences people will tell you about if you just find out.
Yeah, and there's plenty of ways to find out. There's a lot of local organizations, maybe national organizations, and even international organizations that are promoting aviation or even casual aviation, if I can use that phrase. So the EAA, the Experimental Aircraft Association in the US, I know they had this Young Eagles program where you can have little kids come and take a discovery flight. I think they have other programs for even adults and get hands-on training, maybe even at the elementary school level sometime. And so there's programs everywhere to get people interested in aviation. Whether they're going to pursue an aviation career or not is sort of beside the point.
Yeah, I think just having the awareness and just knowing all the aspects of aviation that are out there is just fantastic. The more we can get the word out, the better. And you mentioned EAA, which happens to be headquartered in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. And I think a lot of people are familiar with Oshkosh being the home of, I believe, the world's biggest air show and aviation gathering. It's every end of July, late July for a week, and that is famous worldwide. And I would point to that as an example of plane spotting to the max because of all the things you can see there on the ground and in flight. And so I hope that for anyone who wasn't aware of that and a lot of other air shows around the world and around the country, that is definitely a great way to experience plane spotting. So if you can go out and see an air show this summer, please do.
Yeah, I remember taking my son when he was, I don't know, like 2 or 3, and just the sight and the sound and the noise and the crowd is staggering. Good old days. We even saw an SR-71 Blackbird come and do a low pass.
Oh, no way.
And it is, oh my goodness, talk about excitement. It was just amazing experience. Harrier jets doing vertical takeoff, things that sometimes you know about aviation, sometimes you don't know. And then air shows are fantastic places to go to. So if anybody has the chance of going to an air show, do it. You're not going to regret it. It just, whether it's aerobatics or just casual lazy flights or these fancy military jets, warbirds, there's so many things to see.
I would also give another tip to people who go to an air show for plane spotting. And you mentioned learning something from a local pilot. A lot of these air shows have parking spaces for people to fly their personal airplanes to go attend the air show. And Oshkosh has acres and acres of space for people like that who fly in light aircraft. And one way of learning a little bit more behind the scenes outside of the air show and the warbird shows is to look around at all the 2 and 4 seat airplanes out there that regular people like you and me fly.
And we talked about the Oshkosh show, but there are other big or somewhat big shows everywhere. I think Paris Air Show is one of the biggest in the world, and there are other air shows throughout the world, so it's not just in one place. And that's a nice thing about aviation, I think.
It's definitely one of the most fun activities, I think, is going to an air show. And I'm glad you mentioned that they are all over the world and they're very easy to find online.
Yeah, true. So whether it's a pilot career, you want to be an astronaut, you want to be an aeronautical engineer, or maybe an airplane mechanic, or maybe just casually observe, there's tons of things you can do. It's not locked into one path. That's the beauty.
That's definitely the beauty of it. And if you are just wanting to be a plane spotter, the more aspects of that you can get into, the more fun it's going to be. And if that ends up one day as a 15-minute airplane ride, and then you go on from there, that is yet another way to just experience a little bit more of this amazing thing called flight. And it all starts with plane spotting.
Yeah, just because I watch football doesn't mean I'm going to be a football player. So you can be a plane spotter and not become a pilot. That's
good analogy.
Perfectly okay.
Good analogy. We hope you enjoyed our exploration of plane spotting and hope you'll try it out. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, follow, and hit the like button. We have another great episode lined up for you about sailplanes. Intrigued? Join us then. We are clear to land.
This is